record.
Okay.
All right, so we were talking with Menachem Mendel the other day, and we said that last time, and I mentioned to John today earlier that we started on ether. Was it ether or ether? We couldn't figure out which way. So John started on the conversation. Oh, here's Ruben coming in. And just again, a real brief reintroduction. Several years ago, I was working on a very interesting topic of Ketoret. Ketoret is a meme. And I went to John for interviewing him. He's very knowledgeable in variety of Ketorets. And here's Adrian coming in. Hi, Adrian.
Hello.
Here's our British connection, and our Ruben just disappeared somewhere. Andrew and Ruben come in, and Ruben Wolf just dropped off. So okay, here we're coming in. So I had today coffee with David, and I mentioned that we're talking about the ether today, and I told him the background that John gave me this primer on different spices and what the frankincense is and Lebanon and all that stuff. Very interesting. So I said you'll mention today, and Menachem Mendel said yesterday, let John tell us about the ether. So I said to Helene, my wife, yesterday, John will be talking about ether. So I said, what ether? I think he'll be talking about that special holy substance that fills the earth, semi-holy substance that Aristotle referred to. The earth is filled with ether. And she said, this is not ether. He's just talking about the incense, all this aromatic substance from which perfumes are made. So I say, okay, I over-calculated everything. So John, go ahead. Start, and then if you have time in the end, we'll talk about Pesach. Go ahead.
Well, you're asking, first of all, how to pronounce it. I'm reminded that when the anesthetic properties of ether were discovered back in the 19th century, there was an argument as to who should take priority, whether it was a dentist called Horace Wells or a colleague of his called Thomas William Morton, or a physician called Charles Jackson. And they called on the very famous and distinguished American physician, Oliver Wendell Holmes, to arbitrate on who of the two principal contenders should have priority. And he wrote back a single word answer, ether, E-I-T-H-E-R. Depends how you pronounce that, because in Britain, a lot of people pronounce that either. But the original word goes back 2,500 years and more to Greek times. And it was an attempt to describe the sky above the sky. What is the material substance that exists? Ruth, hello, am I there?
We can hear you.
Oh, you got it, right. Sorry, I got a false message on my screen. What is the substance above the visible sky, the air? And the poets like Homer named it the Aether. If I can spell that correctly, alpha, iota, theta, eta, rho, A-I-T-H-E-R. The Romans turned that into A-E-T-H-E-R, which we've subsequently learned to pronounce ether. And I think that's the preferred pronunciation, but you can have whatever spelling you like. For a long time, it was spelled A-E-T-H-E-R, but now most people resort to the simpler E-T-H-E-R. That's just the name, the etymology. The concept itself, I'm trying to write a book in 5 chapters covering 5 aspects of the ether. And if you've got, you know, about 30 or 40 hours to spare, I could give you the details of the book, but I might be wiser to cut that back a bit. So there are basically two sorts of ether that you want to think about. That's the theoretical ether in the heavens and the practical ether in the laboratory bottle. So which one do you want to talk about? Yep.
Adrian, Menachem Mendel, whatever your call.
Both.
John, isn't ether also what the doctors do, like when they do disinfection, like give you like this to smell ether if you faint?
In one word, no. You don't use ether for resuscitation purposes. Ether is actually an anesthetic.
Uh-huh.
A rather sweet-smelling, somewhat pungent liquid, which evaporates very quickly. So a drop of ether placed on your skin will feel very cold to touch. It is also dangerously inflammable, so you don't muck about with it. Explosions have been known to occur in laboratories. And there are some, well, a medic would call them entertaining stories of explosions that happened in medical practice using ether and other inflammable anesthetics. There was one.
Is it used as anesthetics even today?
Not much.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the pleasantest anesthetic to use. It tends to make people retch, vomit, which when you're trying to induce unconsciousness is actually quite dangerous because people can inhale the vomit and die of pneumonia. So there is a hazard. It is, as I say, dangerously inflammable, explosive. And anyway, people didn't like just the plain nausea or even the taste of it. You used to go into hospital and say, I can smell the ether. Hospitals smell the ether. I don't personally remember that, but that was the old story. In fact, a couple of years after it was introduced, there was a search on for better anesthetics. And James Simpson, an Scottish obstetrician, discovered by chance chloroform, which was pleasanter smelling and induced anesthesia more quickly and was generally very popular, except it had the disconcerting habit every few thousand cases of killing the patient unexpectedly. This wasn't altogether popular with the medical profession, but it was a very popular anesthetic, far more so than ether.
How far back was it used? Like 10 years, 20, 100?
Ether as an anesthetic was discovered in 1846 by an American dentist who offered his services to a surgeon, John Warren, at the Massachusetts General Hospital. And there's still the building which contained the original operating theatre, still exists. It's now a museum, and I have actually been able to go and visit it when I visited Boston. It's a sort of tourist site now, where they administered the first true general anesthetic, allowing surgery to take place painlessly. It's that date, it's always been remembered as Ether Day. But there's some dispute as to who actually introduced it first, but that's the historic anniversary date.
John, am I
I
right?
had ether.
Go ahead, John.
I had ether used on for a surgery when I was 7 years old to repair a hernia. 1957.
Ether?
I believe so. Yeah.
More likely chloroform.
More likely chloroform. Unlikely.
Maybe it was chloroform.
When
All I
I
remember
was,
All I remember is vomiting a lot after I woke up.
yeah, John and I were medical students together, as you may know. And I
Oh, I didn't know that.
remember being instructed how you dosed chloroform. Do you remember this, John? One of the anesthetists told us this. And
Drops, yeah.
you had a gadget that was something like a tea strainer.
Yes.
And in the tea strainer would be put gauze or cotton wool, and it was held above the patient's nose, and the bottle of the chloroform was used to sort of drip on it. And the doses were how much you could pour with your hand with just a few drops. And each dose was referred to as a pennyworth. In other words, the amount of a penny. And pennies in those days in Britain were very large. And it was a round circle of about 1.5 inches wide, and that was a pennyworth. And so what the person who was administering the chloroform would do a circle with the bottle, 1 pennyworth, 2 pennyworths, and so on. I don't remember how many pennyworths was the average dose. I just remember being taught that. But I'm not really sure that we were still using chloroform. The other, of course, terrible thing about chloroform is it causes severe liver injury. So that's not, and that really went out of fashion completely. Ether went out of fashion before that because it was so much more flammable and so much more nauseating to the patient.
Adrian, you're saying
Ether?
chloroform and ether are similar?
They're not similar. They're different chemical substances. They're both organic compounds which exist at room temperature in a liquid form, although, as John says, ether rapidly evaporates, but they were both used as inhalation anesthetics.
Ether is more dangerous or just more unpleasant?
Unpleasant.
Unpleasant.
Chloroform is more dangerous.
Yes. Ether, the terrible thing was vomiting. Mind you, chloroform caused vomiting as well, but ether, terrible.
But I guess they used it just because there was no other choice for anesthesia, right? That's what people have.
There was no anesthesia. Before that, you put a bullet between the patient's teeth and they bit on it.
Of the bottle of whiskey, right?
Yes, but if you a very illuminating thing to read is the famous diarist, John will know very well, Samuel Pepys or Pepys. And he, in those days, one very common condition were bladder stones. And the bladder stones were very, very painful and were removed by inserting a knife high up between the legs into the bladder to take the stone out. And about, I don't remember what it was, 30–40% of people died after that operation of infection. But Samuel Pepys survived it and describes because it was done, without any kind of anesthesia, and described what it was like to have the bladder stone removed. John will know this very well. But
Cutting for a stone is in the Hippocratic Oath, but why was it so common then? I rarely hear of them now.
I don't remember why bladder stones were so common. I think people didn't drink enough fluids, and so I don't remember. I'd have to look that up.
You said they actually reached was a knife up to the stone and just pulled it out, sort of?
Yes. You insert a knife in the place you least want to be touched. And you're right, cutting for stone. In fact, there's a wonderful autobiography by who's his name? The Indian, very wonderful writer who's become very famous in America. I think he's in Stanford University. I'm blocking on his name, but his autobiography is called "Cutting for Stone." If you haven't
I've heard the title. Yeah.
If you haven't read it, it's quite riveting. I mean,
So
why not just go suprapubic though? Why not just go suprapubic?
You'd have to ask them. I don't know why, but it was
going through the groin seems insane.
Not groin. It was just between the anus and the root of the penis.
So you go right through the penis.
No,
Behind.
behind it.
Oh, behind the penis. And
Between the-
but
the
so
roots of the
they'll still break through the skin between anus and penis, right?
Yes, cut
That's-
through it.
But that's insanely dangerous. My goodness.
Right, but this was 17th century.
So they had to reach a canal where the urine is, right? And a follow canal until.
No. Before the canal where the bladder sends the urine out into the outside world, it's the base of the bladder is there in what's called the perineum.
Ooh.
Yes.
Prostatectomy with one sweeping.
No, that would have been further forward.
Yeah.
But that's, you said it's Adrian, in 17th century they did that, like 400 years ago.
Probably,
Yeah, well, of course, Pepys was writing in the middle of the 1600s, the time of the Great Plague, the Black Death, and the Fire of London, and so on. He reported on all of that, and he underwent bladder stone removal, nearly killed it, but he survived it. But about 30-40% got, you can imagine, serious infection and died. But it's worth
But
reading.
what was the infection? Didn't they disinfect the knife, like put it into the fire or something?
I
to
didn't
get
know
it?
about it then.
They
Just
didn't
before
understand
Pasteur.
they didn't know about germ theory in those days.
Hmm. Boy, I cringe just to think about that stuff. Oh,
That's
Oh,
right.
my behind is all like shrivels into like, well, I can't even think about it. How you guys doctors can even think about those type of things, you know?
Well, the 1600, middle 1600s, it's not now.
Oh, boy.
People expected life to be difficult then. It's not like us. We're kind of soft.
Yeah.
So anyway, so John, so going back to you, that's interesting. So back to the ether.
yes, it was interesting. The first attempt at anesthesia proper was slightly before ether, and that was with laughing gas, nitrous oxide. And that had been discovered by the famous chemist Joseph Priestley and was really developed by Humphrey Davy. So Humphrey Davy, the very distinguished and popular chemist of the early 18th century. And he would give demonstrations of how making people inhale laughing gas made them become silly and giggly, and by chance also they became insensitive to pain. But they had entertainments, and people would go to parties and breathe laughing gas and then do all sorts of silly things. So it's a bit like student frolics, sniffing not cocaine, but smoking cannabis. And it was probably just about as harmful. Nitrous oxide is not particularly dangerous, because if you inhale enough to go to sleep, you fall away from the device and start breathing oxygen again.
So does it give you a sense of like valerian people take today to calm you down, like not nervous?
No, it just reduces inhibitions, a bit like alcohol, but it also quite usefully deadens pain. I've been administered nitrous oxide for a dental anesthesia when I was a child. It obviously worked because I don't remember the pain, but I remember the anesthesia. But he had good fun, and lots of people went to these laughing gas entertainments. And it was at one of the
Nitrous oxide was used even as as a standard medical thing with anesthesiologists for a while.
It's still in use by midwives. They give something. The trade name is Entonox. It's a mixture of nitrous oxide, laughing gas, and oxygen, and it comes in flasks. And the great advantage is that the woman in labour can hold the mask on her own face, inhale when she's getting pains and get relief from the pain. If she inhales too much, her hand falls away and she starts just breathing air again. So it's a sort of self-regulating safe system.
Automatic regulator.
Yeah. I think they use other things now, but certainly it was widely used when I was doing obstetric. I don't know about you, Adrian.
Yeah.
Ensign Ox, yeah. And I think it's still around, but my wife used it.
Wow.
Pretty safe. But
The thing is, when you inhale it and you start this funny laughing, it's involuntary. You know it's ridiculous, and you can't. I've had it, and you can't stop yourself. It's totally involuntary. You feel like an idiot because you're laughing for nothing. And yeah, I've had it.
I remember years ago, I had like what was suspected like ulcers, bleeding ulcers. I know I felt real bad at night and my pulse was like 190 or something. So they rushed me to the hospital and they put the tube through my mouth inside there, right? And they gave me something. So as the guy put the tube into my mouth, maybe nose into the mouth all the way there. And I remember the doctor saying, be quiet, be quiet. And I kept talking with the tube in the mouth. The guy said, you can hurt yourself. Stop, shut up, don't talk. And I remember, and I asked him later what happened. He said, we gave you something to relax yourself, which is kind of like a maybe laughing gas, something. So I felt that tube was coming into me. I have completely no worries. I wasn't worried. I just thought, what is it? How far? He said, shut up, don't talk. We need to examine you. But I felt this feeling of euphoria completely, like nothing can hurt me. I'm Superman.
I wouldn't like to diagnose what the anesthetic was in that case. It could have been nitrous oxide, but I doubt it. Not if it was administered by nasotracheal tube. I was taught that technique, but I wasn't very good at it. Fortunately for humanity, I didn't specialize in anesthetics.
You know what the definition of anesthetist is? It's a doctor who's half asleep when the patient's half awake.
Because of the waste gases that you inhale when you're sitting by the patient's head. But that's just the medical ether. There's so many other entertaining stories about ether as well. Oh, with chloroform, that was discovered, I said by chance, by James Simpson. In fact, what he did, he was in Scotland and he had a dinner party with some medical friends, and they thought they'd experiment and try and find something better than ether. So they got bottles from his laboratory in his house and they sniffed them. And they tried this one and that one, and they were not so bad. And then they came across chloroform. And the story goes that they were found under the table, all three of them unconscious, completely unaware of what had happened. When they eventually, I think they were found by the maid who'd come to clear the things from dinner. And when they recovered, they realized that the last bottle was the winner, and that was the chloroform.
Chloroform.
To promulgate it. It was already invented, so they couldn't patent it. It was invented or discovered by, I think, Samuel Morse of Morse code. He was quite a good inventor.
Wow.
But that's chloroform. But their stories go back to the Middle Ages, that people discovered this substance. It doesn't occur in nature. It has to be artificially made. And you make it by boiling raw alcohol, rectified spirit, with vitriolic acid, strong concentrated sulfuric acid. This is quite a delicate process, as you can imagine. And you've got to be careful with the naked flame, and you mustn't mix the acid with water or the whole kit will blow up in your face. But they discovered how to do it.
Wow.
And the alchemist Paracelsus, way back in the 16th century, he discovered it. He tried it on some chickens. He administered grain kernels to some chickens. He soaked the grain in an etheric solution. And the chickens, of course, went quite dopey and drowsy. And then he says that after about half an hour, they recovered and were quite normal. but he didn't make the connection. He didn't realize that he could use it as an anesthetic, though he wasn't a doctor himself.
Wow.
So he missed the boat there.
Menachem Mendel, isn't it amazing where the president, what a unique moment, was the president was the three giants, the three doctors, they're talking about this stuff. I'm just sitting there, my jaw is just dropped, what these guys know. It's just amazing.
Well, I remember reading in the era before anesthesia, the best surgeons were the fastest ones. I remember reading about, there was a famous surgeon in London, I can't remember his name, who could take off a hip in 90 seconds or something like that. It was a famous case in which he was so fast, he had this long, very sharp knife. It was like, almost a meter long. And at one time, he worked so fast, he actually sliced off one of the testicles of one of the assistants holding the patient.
Could have moved faster, yeah.
Very fast.
A real balls up.
But he was also one of the first surgeons in England to use this new technique, which had been discovered in America. And before the year was out, the news traveled fast. The Victorian internet was very quick, and they had sailing ships and steamships going back and forth across the Atlantic carrying the latest news. The first report I read about it medically was the day after it was first used. It was a report in the Scientific American, in the sort of What's New column, way back in 1846.
What was the name of the surgeon?
John Warren.
John Warren.
Warren. He was a skillful and distinguished and good surgeon, and he knew his job, and he realized what had been discovered, how valuable it would be to him. But the dentist who first tried nitrous oxide and then moved on to ether became disenchanted because nobody paid any attention to him. And he got depressed, and then he became addicted to chloroform.
Addicted to chloroform?
State, he went chloroform, yes, he moved on to chloroform because that was developed within a few years. And while he was depressed and agitated, he went out in the street and he splashed sulfuric acid, vitriol, onto some street ladies. He was arrested by the New York police. I don't think he did much harm, but not unnaturally, they arrested him. And he committed suicide in hospital, in prison.
In prison.
Arrested, put in prison, and they found him dead. So I think he opened his femoral artery.
So,
sad story.
Interesting.
I remember
And
the
he administered the anesthetic, was a philanderer, almost a polygamist, a cheat, a scoundrel, a self-publicist, and he fought a long-running battle to patent this wonderful discovery called ether. He wanted the money, and it went as far as Congress, and Congress awarded him a sort of ex gratia payment, but he still wasn't satisfied. And he went to his grave fighting for recognition that he should have payment for administering ether. So there we go. It's a very interesting story. There's a good book. I commend it to you. I'll see if I can find it on my shelf.
That's why during the Civil War, I mean, pretty much doctors operated to, amputate limbs without anesthetic. I guess it just wasn't available.
Well, I'll come back to that. That's the book. It's called Ether Day by Julie Fenster. And it's a very entertaining read. Got a lot of my facts from that.
Where is it published, John?
Sorry?
Is it published where?
America, I think. HarperCollins, New York.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's a second-hand one, but it may or may not be available new, but you might be able to get it second-hand. It's great fun. It's an entertaining story. But that's, as I say, just the ether of the physicians. If you want to go into the electromagnetic ether, I suggest we have another session another time.
How do you say electromagnetic ether?
Sorry?
What is
Electromagnetic ether.
how can that be?
I think
Electro
it would take some time. How does light travel from the stars to your eye? What does it
Oh,
travel?
the ether theory, yeah.
Ether, that's ether. Uh-huh.
There was a substance unseen that they felt that every electromagnetic wave needs a
Medium.
substance to
Medium
travel through, like
to
water.
excite, to propagate through.
Yeah, but some interesting experiments. I'm just taking a course on Einstein's theories from Harvard now, free course online. And there were some very elegant experiments done, which they tried to show that the ether would be pulled along or accelerated and change the speed of light. And of course it didn't.
That's right. The most famous one was by Michelson and Morley, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And of course,
I still can figure out how the speed of light can be 300,000 kilometers an hour. Why not 302? How did Einstein know there's a limit that you can't go faster than the speed of light?
he didn't discover that limit. That was discovered by a combination of James Clerk Maxwell's theory of electricity and magnetism and Lorentz, the Dutch physicist who was a bit senior to Einstein, who worked out the mathematics. For a really reliable explanation, you have to call in, I think, a trained physicist. I don't think we've got any physicists here in the group. So, but the faster you go, the more energy is required to propel you. Your mass increases. And when you get close to the speed of light, your mass increases, getting upwards towards infinity. There's no limit. Well, nothing can have infinite mass. And so nothing can travel faster than light, at least nothing that provides material information.
I remember I was reading like years ago as a kid, I was reading the science on the theory of relativity, and there was an illustration, imagine the giant scissors. Giant scissors, and you have your scissors in your hand, and you push them in, scissors, and the scissors are infinite, very, very long. So as you turn the scissors close, the scissors, like legs of the scissors moving together. So the question is the speed of the tips and which they're approaching each other. Let's say it approaches 300,000 kilometers per second, but let's say scissors are a little bit longer than that. What happens to a portion of the scissors goes beyond that point? Do they come together, or do they stay in space and the metal just deforms and come together and the rest of the scissors don't come together? Because they can travel faster than 300. The tips of the scissors cannot exceed 300,000 kilometers an hour. So how do you close the scissors?
What holds the metal of the scissors together?
Well, just let's say with your hands. I mean, this is very strong. With your hands, you're holding the scissors. The two circles.
It's made of molecules. The scissors are made of atoms of carbon, steel, carbon, and they're held together by electromagnetic forces. If they weren't, you just have a pile of dust. What holds it together is electromagnetic forces, and they cannot travel faster than the speed of electromagnetic waves, light. That is the maximum speed.
So that means the scissors will not close like this. They essentially become like deformed. These
We wouldn't
pieces
be able
come
to close.
together and outer spaces just stay where they are. They don't close together because they can go fast.
The ends will get heavier and heavier and heavier until it requires an infinite amount of force to close them.
Interesting. Gentlemen, we have 3 minutes left. We covered fascinating topic. We came to the scissors and theory of relativity. What would you like to talk about next?
Quick question, John, who wrote the Ether Day?
Julie Fenster, F-E-N.
Yeah, it's available on Kindle.
Good, excellent. And that makes it a cheap read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I commend it to you.
Interesting.
We have a dessert session today.
If you guys want to, we'll talk about Pesach. How do we celebrate Pesach? You want to talk about that?
I have to get going, but you guys can continue.
I think we've got a limited amount of time left. Well, you want to know about ether, but I did warn you that it would take a long time.
That's fine. Well, if we're limited on time, you want to do it next Tuesday? We'll start with the Pesach. Or
Yeah,
any other topics you guys suggest?
next Tuesday.
Sure.
It seems reasonable to talk about Pesach.
After my conversation with David, I have a coffee with David. I had a great meeting for about 2 hours. And I told him that after I was so rude to him, I am trying to speak as little as possible. So I'm trying to zip my mouth and not saying much at all. So whatever you guys want to do, you come up with ideas.
So we're not going to give you any nitrous.
That my daughter told me yesterday she thinks his conversation a lot more entertaining when David's with us because he brings a bit more action into it.
Yeah.
Well, he's very opinionated. He is, for him, it's like not just I think, it's like I know, it's.
But that's fine. Everybody is different. Listen, I mean, who is not? I'm very opinionated. Too much. I know.
I cannot join next Tuesday because I will be traveling at the speed of light.
Where are you going?
It's a place called Israel.
You come to
Oh.
So listen, I will need to see you. We'll make
Well,
arrangements.
we land at 7:30, but in their wisdom, the Israeli government means that even though I had a PCR the day before I step on the airplane, I have to have a PCR before I leave the airport. It's
Boy.
crazy.
Well, that would be perfect time for you to dial in and now Zoom while we're
Yeah,
waiting for
right.
your test.
Yeah, right. I don't know. Well, who knows? It's completely.
If you can log in, what the heck,
Yeah, what the heck? I'll be running around Ben Gurion trying.
You tell us about your test results to see how you want us to come to bail you out, drive up and pull you out from the customs.
As a matter of fact, the rule is that you have your test done, they let you leave the airport, but you immediately have to go into isolation. And I believe the place where you go in isolation is Mea Sharim.
Guys, we have 5 seconds. See you next.